See, a lot of people have this preconception that contemporary art is something complicated, that it doesn't make any sense, and that the medium as a whole peaked in the 1920s, with the start of the modern age. Impressionist, Fauvist, Futurist, along with the technical masters of this generation, the likes of Winslow Homer, William Adolphe Bouguereau, and John Singer Sargent are the peaks of our society, and with the Cubism onwards, it has been a downward spiral ever since. Which is categorically wrong, but I can relate to the idea. You may also wonder, why do these so-called artists deserve so much recognition when the actual geniuses of our generation are treated as commercial slop? And just to get it out of the way before we even start, this is for the professors and snobs who think that anime drawing style isn't art.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know how this machine worked.
Or maybe you would prefer something more credible to your taste. If you share these opinions, but still have an open mind and want to get in our contemporary art scene, but don't know where to start, and want a bit of that historical background, don't worry. Sit back, relax, and I'll try to change your mind, while also trying not to get you too angry in the process, which, with the state that the industry is right now, will be a challenge. So first things first, you have to remember that it was always like this. All the guys whose paintings I have previously shown were hated, and I mean passionately hated when they came out. People often compare them with the technical masters of the previous generations, and when you look at them that way, these ones look unfinished and unrefined. And directors of galleries in the early 20th century didn't want to display unfinished sketches, as they described them, let alone buy and sell them, which prompted many artists to start their own movements so that they could support each other. And now, 100 years later, most people who have an average understanding of art history would describe these as humanity's crowning cultural achievements. But one thing you have to remember is that the guy who painted this was the same guy who put the urinal in the museum. And at the same time, nonetheless, when these paintings were brand new. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I have a whole second half of the video to talk about how that even happened in the first place. What I wanted to say is that art has always been provocative. And even during the most conservative times of our history, artists always wanted to push the boundary of what is allowed and perceived as taboo. And I'll try to explain it by using these two oil paintings as an example. Olympia by Edward Manet and Madame X by John Singer Sargent. To your contemporary eyes, these look incredibly boring. Aesthetically interesting, but the subject itself is very boring. But in the 1900s, these were considered scandalous, downright pornographic. First, let's take a look at Olympia by Edward Manet. Now, at first, you probably wouldn't see anything particularly wrong. It is a life-sized painting of a naked lady in oil. Nothing new there. But here's the thing. She's wearing a black bow on her neck. And the title of the work is Olympia. This woman is a prostitute. If the painter had just said that this is a picture of Venus or any other mythological figure, it would have been completely fine to draw a fully rendered life-size woman. But now, because of this simple ribbon, not to mention an added detail of her shoe slipping off, it is a national scandal. You have something akin to pornographic imagery in the middle of a public gallery. And this was all during the so-called Belle Époque, a period of French and European history after the Franco-Prussian War, categorized by optimism, enlightenment, regional peace, and economic prosperity. And also a time where having a lover for both men and women was modern and even socially encouraged, as long as the parties were discreet about it. Edouard Manet is directly making fun of the hypocrisy of his fellow contemporaries. He directly asks, why is my painting scandalous when you are doing far worse things behind the closed curtains and then pretending that nothing ever happens? And viewed through that lens of the cultural zeitgeist, the work becomes hilarious. The same thing happened with Madame X by John Singer Sargent. Even though the client herself wanted that chest strap to come off her shoulder to arouse a bit of that public controversy, Sargent needed to repaint it immediately for the sake of his own reputation. And hopefully, now that you know the context of the story behind these pieces, you can appreciate them even more as pieces of human history. But you had to know all of of this in order to look at it that way, which is probably the biggest gatekeeper in the community. To get the message, you need a lot of background knowledge. And okay, let me give you a contemporary example. In the case of Jeff Koons, you need to stretch your imagination till you hit the elastic limit to have a sliver of hope in understanding what he wanted to say. But we will talk about this madman a bit later. Art frequently acts as an inside joke that you can laugh at with your friends. I can show you the paintings of Frida Kahlo and say, "She's a woman, she will never be worth anything." And all the people who saw Mulan will laugh. At least I hope so. And people who know the story of Frida will know that she was exploited by her husband, who thought that he will be remembered as the great artist of his generation, and Frida as his humble wife. Safe to say, history and Frida had other plans. And now my joke makes a bit more sense in the context. But a lot of people think that this outside knowledge is the requirement to enjoy art. You can totally go into the gallery, enjoy a piece, and then later, if it tickles your imagination, learn more about it. But with the far off concepts that the artists of the 21st century prefer, you are more likely to be put off rather to be drawn in. Just like when you don't know the inside joke of the group, you can feel a bit left out. And that is kind of the reason why these turn of the 20th century painters persist in the minds of the many as the peak of humanity's artistic expression. These are landscapes, pretty pictures. You don't need to have an art degree to see what was on the artist's mind. And that is where most people's understanding of art ends. But that is also not to say that your taste is not refined if you like these artists. One of my favorite painters of this era are Paul Signac and Franz Marc. It is just that I don't want you to close your mind to something new just because it doesn't look like something you already know. And that is what bothers all artists, now and at the beginning of the 20th century. They collectively said it is not about selling pretty things.
It's about sending a message.
And that is how we got the avant-garde movements like Dadaism, where, in the case of poetry, you would string a bunch of words together without any meaning. Or performative art, where art only exists during the performance. Or land artists, who preferred those giant-ass spiral things in the middle of nowhere. And graffiti artists, who just played Subway Surfers IRL. All of these were ways for artists to get outside of galleries, to collectively say, we are not a part of the industrial capitalistic consumer machine. We are not painters of the elite. Art is for sending the message of the people to the masses. But despite their efforts, the capitalistic machine just chugs right on. Companies of the 40s and 50s saw a way to unite the force, to make money of the culture and the anti-culture movements. All these rebellious forms of art suddenly became exotic, which leads us to the next point. After the Second World War, America became the center of art in place of Europe, and it started to finance and promote these rebellious artists, often without them knowing, a creative way to fight back against communism, by showing the people that in America you can be and do whatever you want, and you will be successful. A giant middle finger to the Soviet Union. No. That is how Jackson Pollock got famous in the first place. See, Pollock grew up on a farm in rural America, which instilled in him a powerful sense of regional identity, which he later, under the advice of his wife and gallerist, leaned into. They created this Clint Eastwood type of an artist, tying both what true American and a true American painter is, even though he passionately hated attention. He was a hermit, a humble man who, besides drinking, really liked to paint. Painting for him was a private endeavor of self-reflection. That is why he was a bit hesitant at first when they asked him to live film his painting process. He felt exposed and naked for the world to see, all for the sake of creating the image of this rebellious cowboy who painted masterpieces in his prairie shed. And with all that said, now you're probably getting the picture. Starving artists who up to that point were like, fuck the system, now got insanely rich off the system for saying fuck fuck the system. And you got to admit, that is cool. And the man who best embodied everything that I just said is definitely one of the biggest names of the 21st century, and despite all the cameras around the world, still managed to hide his identity. The name you probably already know, Banksy. This anonymous punk street artist once had to constantly run and hide from the police in order to paint his illegal graffiti. Now those same policemen are guarding his work with everything that they have in order to preserve them. A hooligan turned genius. And the artist himself finds this utterly ridiculous. In one instance, he openly paints the Senate as bunch of degenerate monkeys. Boom! $12 million. A one-panel comic breaking the fourth wall and saying that he can't believe that people are buying this shit. Boom! Another million. And his by far most famous performance was this. With the strike of a gavel, his work was sold for $1.4 million. And then the secret shredder started tearing it apart. A stunt performed by Banksy himself. He retitled the work, now known as Love is in the Bin, which on October 2021 sold for, and get this, $25.4 million US dollars. By the way, he wanted to completely shred it, but the mechanism apparently misfired.
60% of the time, it works every time.
But you get the point. Should I even continue? Is there a point? This is ridiculous, and he knows it. One of my favorite moments from his documentary, which is on YouTube, and you should totally watch it if you're interested. I can't explain the state of the industry better than the man actively working in it. The final conclusion for me is just pure gold.
Tony was a genius all along. Maybe he got a bit lucky. Maybe it means art is a bit of a joke.
I think the joke is on... I don't know who the joke's on, really. I don't even know if there is a joke.
I could not have said it better myself. When they hear this, people immediately think that they could have done something similar and also become famous. That statement is simply not true. Nobody could be as successful as Banksy. Not even Banksy. You want to know how I know? Because Banksy himself made a stunt where he was selling his original works for $60. Let me remind you, these are selling for millions. Repeat, millions. And a few people bought them. The ones who did said that they needed some art to decorate their room. That is what he means when he says that art is a bit of a joke. He was simply at the right place at the right time with the right skills. The myth about the artist sold his art, and you can't separate the two, which serves as a nice segue into the next guy on our list. If you thought the previous ones were weird, I'm sorry, but you ain't seen nothing yet. Now, unlike many of his colleagues that suffer from a severely overinflated ego that make them think they are better than they actually are, Maurizio Cattelan is one of those very rare cases of a very chill and down-to-earth man. He himself admits that he can't draw and sculpt. He solely relies on other artists to make his ideas come to life. But honestly, that doesn't lessen his pretty interesting concepts. One of many examples is his fully functioning toilet titled America, which visitors could actually use in a real public restroom inside the exhibition, before it was naturally closed down and later ultimately stolen. My favorite piece of his work would be the 2011 Venice Art Biennale, one of the most prestigious exhibitions in the world. He decided to place a bunch of fake pigeons everywhere, the sky rats of our society that somehow always manage to find their way in and leave their stains everywhere. So you always have to pay attention where you are in order to avoid them. So naturally, he titled the work Tourists. But the piece that sparked the most amount of buzz around him is this famous banana, taped to a wall and titled Comedian. You probably know it from the countless memes that sparked over it. But what does it mean exactly? And why is it so popular? And why does it deserve to be regarded as one of the most influential pieces of the 21st century? The first reason is because it was shown at the Art Basel Miami Beach in 2019. Now, you have to remember that galleries galleries all around the world would pay good money to have their works displayed for a chance at that golden recognition at the exhibition. You, a common peasant, could buy a $50 ticket and see the artworks that are on display. For you, it is just an exhibition, and for the 1%, it is a big annual shopping mall. And Maurizio Cattelan wanted to highlight that separation. He went to the store and bought a normal item that we commoners use and anyone could have, sold it to the rich with a certificate of authenticity for the equivalent of 6 average US salaries, and then put it on display for the commoners to see and take selfies with. And then, to add fuel to the fire, Georgian performance artist David Donta decided to eat the banana for his own performance, calling it the hungry artist. And to add another layer of irony on top of already ridiculous amounts of irony, he didn't destroy the work at all. Because it was never about the banana, but about the idea that that object represents. The museum has a certificate for it, and they can just replace it. They bought the license for that idea from Maurizio Cattelan. The joke being that anyone could do this, but only the ones with the certificate to do so, and under the guidelines from Maurizio Cattelan himself, can claim that they have the original work. I mean, you got to admit at least a little that it is brilliant. He's making fun of both the people who buy his art and the ones who worship it, but not in a derogatory sense. It's more of a kudos, like that scene from The Great Gatsby. He's taking full advantage of the banality of the situation. He's like the writers of South Park, but if Matt and Trey were wearing tuxedos, and not this.
Best song, blame Canada. Matt's not. Yeah, I'm not.
The message in his work is always real, but he exaggerates it to spark a conversation around the topic, and not to leave you in a state of dread and impending doom. For example, the ninth hour represents Pope John Paul II lying on the ground after being struck by a meteorite. Now, if you are a cynic atheist, you are probably picturing something akin to this. Maybe you are reading this like a parallel to a moment where the Christ cried out, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" Or maybe it draws attention to the illusion of power, control and immunity, that even someone like the Pope could perish by RNG. Now you can argue that it is dumb, moronic, genius, subversive, but one thing you can't say is that it is of no consequence. He is continuing the legacy that started over 100 years ago, and now I think it is as good time as any to talk about the first man to ever put a common object in an art gallery, sign it, number it, and call it art. I'm of course talking about one and only Marcel Duchamp. Now, even normies can't argue that, all things considered, he was a terrific artist. A cubist at first, which earned him his first amount of fame, but then when he painted his nude descending a staircase, by far one of his most famous works, he was straight up rejected by cubists for, and I quote, being too futurist. Remember what I said at the beginning of the video. Snobbery, even amongst colleagues, is unfortunately something that will always be relatable. And that uncalled criticism would honestly change the course of history. Something changed that day inside Marcel. Something snapped. From now on, he was a solo artist, with a passionate hatred of being told what to do. And mark my words, viewer, he will have his revenge. A bit later, he visited an aviation salon, and upon seeing a propeller of a plane and the beauty of its form, he realized something. High art oil paintings are washed up. It is a very limited scope of what art is or isn't, and it is there where he got the idea for something different. Bicycle Wheel was his first ready-made in 1913. He liked the way it spun. You can think of it like a fidget spinner or a lava lamp for him. He realized that these found objects, as he called them, can provoke an emotional response in him, just like a sculpture can. Just because it was made in a factory, it doesn't lessen its artistic value. And him recognizing the value of this piece is an artistic process in itself. He removed its practical function and transformed it into something else, picked a title and introduced a new meaning. Founding principles that today all artists stand by. But in 1913, even the pioneer of this form didn't really think of them that way. They were just novelty pieces for him to fidget while working. After life in Europe got particularly stressful, he moved to New York, where he was planning to start a new life. It is also here where he found out that his new descending a staircase, which was rejected by the Parisians, now made a splash in the New York City, making Marcel Duchamp a sensation overnight. But it was over, he gave up. Despite his success, he wanted to be free from painting, and then he remembered those ready-mades that he left in France. Maybe there was something to that idea, but they were unfortunately already thrown out as junk. Soon after, the Society of Independent Artists was founded in 1917, for which Duchamp was chosen as one of key chairmen of the hanging committee. Now, for someone who downright hates artistic groups, you can probably guess where this was going. The society wanted to stage an exhibition of a new form of art, without any boundaries, with a rule that anyone and anything can apply. All you needed to enter was to pay a $6 fee and you are good to go. The works would even be shown alphabetically to avoid any kind of favorism. Now, for someone who is a bit experimental with his work, this sounds great. But Duchamp could already smell that the group was not planning on showing everything that was submitted. They would decide what was worthy enough to be displayed, even though they themselves said that everything is allowed. And Marcel Duchamp was furious. So he went to a plumbing supply store, bought the first urinal that they had, and submitted it under the pseudonym Richard Mutt. And just as he predicted, like a bunch of hypocrites, despite saying that everything will be displayed, hid his work under some curtains so that nobody could see it. His work didn't even show in the catalog that was sorted alphabetically. Only a photograph of Alfred Stieglitz remains of his original work. Unfortunately, Marcel Duchamp's great revenge plan was foiled, at least for now. After a few years, Duchamp said that he was resigning from art to play chess, but in secret he worked on the last great exhibition, the retrospective of his work that would define contemporary art for generations to come. More than 40 years of planning and experimenting will finally come to fruition, and on that exhibition everything finally clicked in the eyes of the public. Art is not something that exists in a bubble, but changes and evolves with humanity's perception of it. We decide what a piece means to us, and the artist is a humble guide that uses everything at his disposal to send a message. So the exhibition was a success, but it also confirmed, no, cemented in place one true fact. Nothing exists without the public. Theater does not exist without the audience. You are nobody until somebody loves you. If a tree falls in a forest, it doesn't make a sound. The compositions that Marcel Duchamp put in front of us have become so abstract that the only way they can make sense is if you, as an observer, give them meaning. Our brains are hardwired to find patterns in the chaos, and Marcel uses that to his advantage. In a way, he invented a perfect sculpture, because it can be whatever you want it to be.
Said that's a hand. Maybe I'm a magical train, and that hand is a wheel. Maybe I'm a candy-making machine, or a hotel for tiny clowns.
That was his ultimate revenge. He basically destroyed any and every preconception of what can be considered a piece of art that will stand the test of time. He opened the Pandora's box. People naturally began to wonder, if anything can be art, then I can make up a bullshit story and I can sell anything as a piece of art.
I discovered at a very early age that if I talk long enough, I could make anything right or wrong. So either I'm God or truth is relative. And in either case, booyah.
Being an artist suddenly became choosing the best display case for a thing inside a big white room. And no one encapsulates this way of thinking better than Jeff Koons. Most people are familiar with the work of Jeff Koons through his series of sculptures that look like inflatable rubber toys, which he makes out of solid steel. Now, complete honesty, this is a really exciting idea. You wanted to highlight that you like their aesthetics and texture, so you took the effort to make and render them in a non-perishable material. That is interesting, that is exciting. But then he tries to assign some meaning to them, to make them seem like more than they actually are, and it really comes off as forced.
Parallel dialogues going on. I mean, the carrot to the mouth is like an orator like I'm speaking right now, a microphone, but it also kind of a symbol of masturbation, a carrot. Really would like, you would like to be able to communicate the sensation I get when I look at this piece. I mean, I feel something. I feel kind of a sexual stimulation, and there's also some sensual aspects to it too. I mean, you have the handle and you have the bag right there. It could be looked at as masculine, or you could look at it and say, oh, the bag is the womb.
This sounds like an explanation you would make up on the spot to make fun of a piece of art that doesn't initially make sense. Now remember what we discussed about Marcel Duchamp's work, that the viewer is the one who gives meaning to a piece. But that inherently means that you can't really force a meaning to an abstract piece of art, just like you can't force your opinion on other people. You will hear in other interviews that he encourages any kind of reading of his work.
Everybody, whatever experiences you have in life, your interpretations of something, your experience, the art that you're feeling, that's perfect.
But he's the creator. His explanation naturally has a bit more weight and influences how you experience the piece. And these weak and perverted explanations honestly lessen the work. Another critique on his account would be that he doesn't produce the work himself, but rather has a team of artists that do that for him. And to be perfectly clear, that is completely fine, and is something that has been happening even before the Renaissance. Masters would have a studio with a bunch of disciples who would do their underdrawing, stretch the canvas, mix pigments, and so on. And then later, when everything is ready, the master would come in and fully render the piece. They were doing art for their living, and this was the only way they could keep up with the demand. One of more modern examples would be Auguste Rodin. When he was starting, he studied under famous sculptors himself, said that nothing grows under a shadow of a big tree, and then proceeded to start his own factory, full of underpaid interns. And that is how you get 10 original Rodins of the Thinker, his most famous sculpture, and another 12 that came after his death. And he's regarded as one of the greatest sculptors in history. So no, Jeff Koons does not deserve hate for that. He's hated because he's just bonkers. Every so often, he would get an incredibly interesting idea, something exciting, and the rest of the time, he's stretching the meaning of his work so much that it borders on parody. And now for something that personally disgusts me, is the monument to the terrorist attack in Paris. I don't know about you, but a colorful bouquet of flowers that are similar to his other work that he described as erotic doesn't exactly sound like something you should put at a place of mourning. Please study Yugoslavian brutalist memorials to know how a monumental architectural memorial is supposed to look like. This, in my opinion, is just not right. And now that you have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, what is the final verdict? The question that you're still probably asking yourself: why should you waste time and money to go to art exhibitions?
I don't get it.
Because it is fun. Yes, you will see a lot of trash and question whether or not humanity even deserves to survive more often than you would want. But every so often, you will stumble across something truly spectacular that tickles your imagination. For example, I kind of randomly stumbled across the exhibition of Tanaka Rouhei. And now he's one of my favorite Japanese artists of all time. And I didn't even know that the guy existed until I found myself at his exhibition. I know he's technically a bit of an older artist, but may a meteorite strike me down right now if I didn't mention him. It should be illegal to be as good as he is. He deserves his own video, which I will for sure make in the near future. So as long as you have an open mind about it, and don't take it too seriously, it is an incredible medium that sees the world in a completely new light. All you need is to open your eyes to it. And watch my videos, of course. Please subscribe. Bye!